The bullet tore through the saloon window 3 inches from where Helena Owens stood, and she did not flinch because death had been chasing her for 200 miles already, and she was too exhausted to care anymore. She watched the glass shatter across the wooden floor while men dove for cover and women screamed. But she just stood there with her carpet bag clutched in one dusty hand, wondering if this God-forsaken town of Bozeman, Montana, would be her grave or her salvation. It was August of 1882, and the summer heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, including hope. The shooting stopped as quickly as it started. Some drunk cowboy had gotten trigger-happy outside, and now the sheriff was dragging him away by his collar while the saloon owner cursed about his window. Helena felt someone touch her elbow and she spun around, her heart finally catching up to the danger that had just passed. "You all right, miss?" The man who spoke wore a dusty black hat and had the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough softness. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and when he looked at her, she felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "I am fine," she said, and her voice only shook a little. She had practiced keeping it steady for weeks now, ever since she had fled Chicago with nothing but the clothes on her back and the money she had stolen from the man who had claimed to love her, while he beat her black and blue. The cowboy did not look convinced, but he tipped his hat and started to turn away. Helena felt panic rise in her throat because she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, and this stranger had kind eyes, and she was so tired of being alone. "Wait," she said, and he stopped. "I am looking for work. Any kind of work. Do you know of anyone who might be hiring?" He studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn dress that had once been fine, her face that was too thin, her hands that trembled slightly despite her best efforts to still them. Helena lifted her chin and met his gaze, refusing to be ashamed of her desperation. "The Twisted Pine Ranch might need help," he said slowly. "My boss, Mrs. Margaret Thompson, runs a cattle operation about 5 miles north of town. Her cook quit last week, and she has been complaining about having to feed the hands herself." "I can cook," Helena said quickly, though the truth was she had only learned the basics from her mother before the woman had died when Helena was 12. But she would learn. She had to. "Can you handle living on a ranch? It is not easy work and the men can be rough around the edges." "I can handle anything," Helena said, and she meant it. She had handled far worse than rough cowboys. The man nodded slowly, then stuck out his hand. "Mason Travis, I am the foreman at Twisted Pine." She took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Helena Owens. Well, Miss Owens, let me buy you a meal and then we will ride out to the ranch so you can meet Mrs. Thompson. Fair warning, though, she does not suffer fools, and she will know if you are lying about being able to cook." Helena swallowed hard but nodded. "I understand." They left the saloon and walked down the dusty main street of Bozeman to a small restaurant that served hot food and cold water. Mason ordered steak and potatoes for both of them, and Helena tried not to fall on the food like a starving animal even though she had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days. She forced herself to take small bites, to chew slowly, to maintain some semblance of dignity. "Where are you from?" Mason asked, cutting into his steak. "Chicago," Helena said, because lying would be pointless. Someone would find out eventually. Long way from home. It was not home anymore. He did not press, and she was grateful for that. Instead, he told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle they ran, about the 5 other cowboys who worked there, about Mrs. Thompson, who had inherited the place from her husband when he died in a riding accident 3 years ago. He spoke with a quiet affection that told Helena he respected his boss, and that eased some of her worry. When they finished eating, Mason paid for both meals despite her weak protest, and then led her to the livery where he had left his horse. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Mason swung up into the saddle and then offered Helena his hand. "Have you ridden before?" he asked. "Not often," she admitted. "Just hold on to me and you will be fine." She placed her foot in the stirrup he had freed for her and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under the extra weight but did not protest. Helena wrapped her arms around Mason's waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and tried not to think about how long it had been since she had touched another person without fear. They rode out of town at an easy pace, following a dusty trail that cut through open grassland dotted with sage and wildflowers. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in August. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the air smelled like dust and grass and something wild that Helena could not name. It was nothing like Chicago with its smoke and crowds and endless noise. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "It is something, is it not?" Mason said, and she realized she had been holding her breath. "It is," she whispered. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Helena felt some of the tension that had been knotted in her shoulders for months begin to ease. Maybe this place could be different. Maybe she could start over. Maybe she could be someone new here, someone who did not carry all the bruises and scars of her past. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was a collection of buildings clustered around a large barn, with corrals spreading out to either side. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch, and smoke rose from its chimney despite the heat. Mason guided his horse toward the house and dismounted, then helped Helena down. "Wait here," he said, and went inside. Helena stood in the dusty yard, clutching her carpet bag and trying to look respectable. She could hear voices from inside the house, one male and one female, the latter sharp and questioning. After a few minutes, Mason emerged with a woman who had to be Mrs. Thompson. She was in her mid-50s with gray streaking her brown hair, which she wore pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined from sun and hardship, but her eyes were keen and assessing. She looked Helena up and down with the kind of thoroughness that made Helena want to squirm. "Mason says you can cook," Mrs. Thompson said without preamble. "Yes, madam." "What can you make?" Helena thought fast. "Biscuits, stew, roast beef, fried chicken, cornbread, beans, pie, cobbler." She listed everything her mother had taught her, and everything she had watched other cooks make in the boarding houses she had stayed in during her flight from Chicago. "Can you make enough to feed 6 hungry cowboys 3 times a day?" "Yes, madam." Mrs. Thompson narrowed her eyes. "You are running from something." Helena felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to hold the older woman's gaze. "Yes, madam, but not the law. I have not done anything wrong except try to survive." There was a long silence. Mason shifted his weight beside her, and Helena could feel his tension, but she did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Mrs. Thompson, refusing to back down, refusing to beg even though she wanted to. Finally, Mrs. Thompson nodded. "You will make breakfast tomorrow morning. If it is edible, you have the job. Room and board plus $20 a month. You will sleep in the small room off the kitchen and you will keep to yourself and not cause trouble with my men. Understood?" "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam." "Do not thank me yet. If you cannot cook like you claim, you will be back in town by noon tomorrow." Mrs. Thompson turned and walked back into the house without another word. Mason let out a breath. "She likes you." "That was her liking me," he grinned, and it transformed his face from weathered to handsome. "Trust me, if she did not like you, she would have sent you packing already. Come on, I will show you where you will be staying and introduce you to the boys." The room off the kitchen was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. It had a window that looked out over the corrals, and Helena thought it was the nicest place she had stayed in months. She set her carpetbag on the bed and turned to find Mason watching her from the doorway. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for bringing me here, for giving me a chance." "Everyone deserves a chance," he said, and something in his voice made her think he was speaking from experience. "Dinner is at 6. I will introduce you to the other hands then, and you can see what supplies you have to work with in the kitchen." He left her alone, and Helena sank down on the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the past weeks crash over her like a wave. She wanted to cry, but she had no tears left. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings and washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away the dust from the ride. Then she went to explore the kitchen. It was a large room with a wood stove, a long work table, shelves stocked with supplies, and a pantry that was better equipped than she had dared hope. There was flour and sugar, dried beans and rice, salt pork and bacon, canned vegetables and fruit, spices and lard. She could work with this. She could make this work. Helena spent the next hour planning her menu for the morning. Biscuits, definitely, bacon and eggs, fried potatoes, coffee. Simple food, but filling and done well. She found the biscuit cutter and mixing bowls, familiarized herself with the stove, located the coffee pot. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, she felt marginally more confident. The cowboys came in from their work dirty and tired, talking among themselves until they saw her. Then they fell silent, staring with open curiosity. Mason came in last and gestured her forward. "Boys, this is Miss Helena Owens. She's going to be cooking for us starting tomorrow." "Miss Owens, this is Charlie, Jack, William, Pete, and Roy." They were all younger than Mason except for Roy, who had to be in his 60s. They mumbled greetings and found seats at the long table that dominated the room adjacent to the kitchen. Mrs. Thompson appeared and took her place at the head of the table, and Helena served the meal the older woman had prepared before her arrival. It was simple fare, beef and beans, but the men ate like they were starving. Helena watched them, noting who took seconds, who ate quickly and who savored their food, who talked and who stayed quiet. She would need to learn their preferences, their schedules, their temperaments. She would need to become invisible and indispensable at the same time. After dinner, the men went back to their bunkhouse and Mrs. Thompson retired to her study. Mason lingered, helping Helena clear the table without being asked. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know, but you look like you are about to fall over and tomorrow is going to be a long day." She wanted to deny it, but he was right. "I will manage. I am sure you will." He set the last of the plates on the counter and turned to face her. "But if you need anything, my room is the first one on the right in the bunkhouse. Do not hesitate to ask. Why are you being so kind to me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Mason was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most. Figured I should pay it forward." He left before she could respond, and Helena stood in the kitchen feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. It felt dangerous, that warmth. It felt like hope, and hope was a luxury she could not afford. But she went to bed that night thinking about blue eyes and calloused hands, and for the first time in months, she did not have nightmares. Helena woke before dawn, her body trained by years of early rising. She dressed quickly in the dim light and made her way to the kitchen, lighting the lamps and stoking the fire in the stove. Her hands moved with purpose as she measured flour, cut in lard, added buttermilk. The biscuit dough came together smoothly, and she felt her confidence grow as she cut out perfect circles and arranged them in the baking pan. The bacon went into a cast iron skillet, filling the kitchen with its savory smell. She peeled and sliced potatoes, got the coffee brewing, cracked eggs into a bowl. By the time she heard boots on the porch, she had biscuits coming out of the oven, golden and perfect, and the rest of the breakfast nearly ready. Mrs. Thompson came in first, her sharp eyes taking in the organized chaos of the kitchen, the food steaming on the stove. She said nothing, just poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. The cowboys filtered in next, their hair damp from washing, their faces showing surprise at the spread before them. Mason was last, and when his eyes met hers across the room, she saw approval there that made her stand a little straighter. Helena served the food, watching anxiously as Mrs. Thompson took her first bite of biscuit. The older woman chewed slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once and reached for the butter. "You will do," Mrs. Thompson said, and Helena felt relief wash over her so strongly she had to grip the edge of the stove to steady herself. The men dug into their breakfast with enthusiasm, and Helena heard the sounds of appreciation that were better than any words. She poured more coffee, refilled the biscuit basket, made sure everyone had enough. When the meal was finished and the men had headed out to start their work, Mrs. Thompson stood and fixed Helena with a level gaze. "You have the job. Do not make me regret this." "I will not, madam," and she meant it. Helena threw herself into the work with a determination born of desperation and gratitude. She cooked 3 meals a day for the ranch hands, learning their preferences and adjusting her recipes accordingly. She kept the kitchen spotless, the pantry organized, the wood box full. She rose before the sun and fell into bed exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work. The days turned into weeks, and late summer faded into early autumn. The mornings grew cooler, and the aspen trees in the distant mountains turned gold. Helena found a rhythm to the ranch life, a pattern that was soothing in its predictability. She learned the sounds of the place, the lowing of cattle, the neighing of horses, the voices of the men as they worked. She learned when to expect them for meals, what jobs kept them out late, who liked extra coffee and who preferred water. And she learned about Mason Travis. He was up earlier than the other hands, often coming to the kitchen just as she was starting the coffee. At first, he would just nod and pour himself a cup, then head back out. But gradually, he started staying longer, leaning against the counter while she worked, talking about the day ahead or the weather or nothing in particular. His voice was low and steady, and Helena found herself looking forward to those quiet moments before the rest of the house woke. She learned that he was 29 years old, that he had been working on ranches since he was 15, that he had come to Montana from Texas after his parents died in a fever epidemic. She learned that he took his responsibilities seriously, that he was fair with the men under him, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. And she learned that, when he looked at her, she felt something she had sworn never to feel again. It terrified her. One morning in late September, Mason came into the kitchen earlier than usual. Helena was kneading bread dough, her hands working the elastic mass with practiced efficiency. He poured his coffee and watched her work in silence for a few minutes. "You are good at this," he said finally. "I have had practice. Mrs. Thompson says you are the best cook she has ever had." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. That is kind of her. It is the truth. Mason took a sip of his coffee. "You settling in all right, the boys treating you respectfully. Everyone has been very kind. Good. Because if anyone gives you trouble, you tell me. Understood?" There was something fierce in his voice that made Helena look up from her dough. Mason's jaw was set, his blue eyes intense, and she realized with a start that he was protective of her. The thought made her chest tight. "I will," she said softly. He nodded and drained his coffee. "I am riding out to check the north fence line today. Might not be back until after dark. If Mrs. Thompson asks, tell her I will have my report tomorrow morning. Be careful." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Mason paused halfway to the door. He turned back, and the look on his face made her heart stutter. "I will," he said, and then he was gone. Helena stood in the kitchen with her hands covered in flour, her heart beating too fast, and knew she was in trouble. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that the flutter in her stomach when she saw him was just nerves, that the way her eyes searched for him at mealtimes was just concern for the ranch's foreman, that the warmth that spread through her when he smiled at her was just gratitude. But she had never been good at lying to herself. October arrived with a cold snap that frosted the grass in the mornings and made the cattle restless. The men worked longer hours preparing for winter, and Helena found herself keeping food warm late into the evening for whoever came in last. More often than not, it was Mason. He would sit at the table while she heated up his dinner, too tired to do more than eat mechanically. Sometimes he would tell her about his day, about the fence that needed mending or the steer that had gotten stuck in a ravine or the mountain lion tracks they had found near the north pasture. Sometimes he would just eat in silence while she cleaned the kitchen around him. One night, he fell asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his folded arms. Helena found him there when she came back from the pantry, his breathing deep and even, his face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake. She stood watching him for a long moment, taking in the lines around his eyes, the scar on his left cheekbone, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. She wanted to reach out and brush it back. She wanted to touch his face to trace the line of his jaw to learn the shape of him with her hands. Instead, she gently touched his shoulder. "Mason, you should get to bed." He jerked awake, disoriented, his hand going instinctively to the gun at his hip before he recognized her. "Sorry. I must have dozed off. You worked too hard." He gave her a tired smile. "Pot calling the kettle black, Miss Owens." "Helena, please just call me Helena." Something shifted in his expression. "Only if you call me Mason, all right, Mason." The way he looked at her when she said his name made her feel like she was standing too close to the stove. She stepped back, breaking the moment, and busied herself with wrapping up the leftover biscuits. "You should get some sleep," she said, not looking at him. "So should you." "I will. Soon." She heard him stand, heard his boots on the wooden floor. She thought he would leave, but instead he moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him behind her. "Helena." She turned, and he was right there, close enough to touch. His eyes were searching her face, looking for something, and she did not know what he saw, but it made him reach up and brush a strand of hair back from her cheek. His fingers were gentle, and she found herself leaning into the touch before she could stop herself. "I am not a good bet," she whispered. "I have too much baggage, too many things in my past that I cannot talk about. I am not asking for your past. I am just asking for right now. I do not know if I can give anyone anything. I do not know if there is enough left of me." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "I will never be enough," she said, the words breaking on a sob she tried to hold back. "I am too damaged, too broken. I will never be enough for someone like you." Mason's other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. "You are more than I ever hoped for," he said, and the words were so sincere, so full of something she was afraid to name, that she felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "You do not know me," she protested weakly. "Then let me know you, Helena. Let me see all the parts you think are broken, and let me decide for myself." She should say no. She should pull away, should protect herself, should remember all the reasons why letting someone close was dangerous. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of pretending she did not feel anything, so tired of being afraid. "All right," she whispered, and Mason smiled. He did not kiss her, though she thought he wanted to. Instead, he dropped his hands and stepped back, giving her space, respecting the fragile trust she was offering. "Get some sleep, Helena," he said softly. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her heart pounding and hope blooming in her chest like wildflowers after rain. The next few weeks passed in a strange, sweet tension. Mason did not push, did not demand more than she was ready to give. But he was there, constant and steady, showing up in small ways that made her feel seen and valued. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range, claiming the horses had trampled through a patch, and he figured someone should appreciate them before they wilted. He fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door without being asked. He made sure she ate at mealtimes, pointing out that she was always feeding everyone else, but skipping her own food. Helena found herself opening up in increments, telling him small things about her life before Montana. She told him about her mother's death, about growing up alone in Chicago, about the jobs she had worked trying to survive. She did not tell him about Richard, about the man who had courted her with flowers and promises, who had shown his true nature only after she had moved into his house, who had used his fists to keep her in line. She was not ready for that story yet. Maybe she would never be. But Mason seemed content with whatever she could give. He told her about his own past, about growing up poor in Texas, about losing his parents, about the hard years drifting from ranch to ranch before Mrs. Thompson had given him a chance to prove himself as foreman. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had mostly given up on. And slowly, carefully, Helena felt something inside her start to heal. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but promised heavier storms to come. The men worked to get the cattle moved to winter pasture, to stock up the hay in the barns, to prepare for the long Montana winter. Helena added to her workload by starting to preserve and can, putting up vegetables and fruits, making sure the pantry would last through the months when fresh food was scarce. One afternoon, Mason came in from riding the fence line with his left hand wrapped in a bloody bandana. Helena looked up from the pie crust she was rolling and felt her stomach drop. "What happened?" "Just a scratch. Caught it on some barbed wire. Let me see. It is fine, really." "Mason Travis, sit down and let me see your hand right now." He must have heard something in her voice, some echo of the fear that had shot through her when she saw the blood, because he sat. Helena unwrapped the bandana carefully, revealing a deep gash across his palm that was still bleeding sluggishly. She drew in a sharp breath. "This needs stitches." "I have had worse." "I am sure you have, but that does not mean you should not take care of it." She heated water and gathered clean cloth, thread and needle. Her hands shook slightly as she cleaned the wound, and Mason watched her with an intensity that made her nervous. "You are scared," he said quietly. "Of course I am scared. You are bleeding." "It is just a cut, Helena. I know that." She threaded the needle, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "This is going to hurt. I can handle it." She worked as quickly and carefully as she could, her stitches small and even. Mason did not flinch, though she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his other hand gripped the edge of the table. When she finished and wrapped his hand in clean bandages, she let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he said. "You need to keep it clean and dry. Change the bandage twice a day. If it starts to look infected, tell me immediately." "Yes, madam." She looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What? You were terrified," he said. "Not just worried, terrified." Helena looked away, gathering up the bloody cloths. "I told you seeing you hurt scared me." "Why, Helena?" The question hung in the air between them. She could deflect, could change the subject, could retreat behind her walls. But she had promised to let him in, and he deserved the truth. "Because I care about you," she said quietly. "More than I should, more than is safe." "Safe?" She turned to face him, her hands twisting the cloth. "I cared about someone before. I thought he loved me, but he did not. He hurt me, Mason. He hurt me in ways I cannot talk about yet. And when I finally found the courage to leave, he told me he would find me, that I belonged to him, that I could never escape." Mason had gone very still, his eyes hard and cold. "Did he follow you here?" "I do not know. I have been running for so long I do not know if he is still looking or if he gave up. I do not know if I will ever be safe. His name." "What? Tell me his name, Helena." She shook her head. "No, because I can see what you are thinking, and I will not let you risk yourself for me. I will not let you get hurt because of my mistakes. Caring about someone is not a mistake. It is when it puts them in danger." Mason stood, and she thought he might argue, but instead he stepped close and took her face in his hands, careful of his injured palm. "Listen to me. I do not know what this man did to you, but I know it was not your fault. You did not deserve whatever he did. And if he shows up here, if he tries to hurt you again, he will have to go through me and every man on this ranch. You are not alone anymore, Helena. Do you understand? You are not alone." The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his chest. It was the first time she had cried since leaving Chicago, the first time she had let herself feel the full weight of her fear and pain and grief. And Mason just held her, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soft reassurances that she barely heard but felt deep in her bones. When the tears finally subsided, Helena pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I got your shirt all wet." "I do not care about the shirt." He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "I care about you, Mason. I am not him, Helena. I will never be him. I will never raise my hand to you, never try to control you, never make you feel like you are less than you are. I swear that to you." "I know," she whispered, and realized she meant it. Whatever else she feared, she did not fear Mason. "I know you would not." He kissed her forehead, gentle and chaste, and it felt like a promise. "We will take this as slow as you need. There is no rush. I am not going anywhere." Helena nodded, leaning into him for one more moment before stepping back. "You should go get some rest. That hand needs time to heal. Only if you promise to stop working yourself to exhaustion and take a break too. Deal?" He left with a small smile, and Helena stood in the kitchen feeling lighter than she had in years. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it felt smaller now. Manageable, because she was not facing it alone anymore. Winter settled over the ranch with a vengeance. Snow fell in heavy blankets, piling up against the buildings and making the daily work of caring for the cattle a brutal slog. The men came in from their rounds half frozen, and Helena kept pots of stew and coffee perpetually hot on the stove. The kitchen became the heart of the house in those dark months, warm and bright and smelling of bread and cinnamon and home. Mrs. Thompson watched the growing closeness between Helena and Mason with shrewd eyes but said nothing. The other hands teased Mason good-naturedly about getting sweet on the cook, and he took it with grace, and the occasional well-aimed threat to assign the worst jobs to anyone who bothered Helena about it. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Thompson surprised everyone by declaring a holiday. She produced a bottle of good whiskey and poured everyone a generous shot, and Helena made a special dinner with roasted chicken and all the trimmings. They sang songs around the piano in the parlor, and Helena found herself laughing at the terrible off-key harmonies and feeling something she had almost forgotten: joy. Mason caught her alone in the kitchen later while she was washing up. He had something in his hand, wrapped in brown paper. "I got you something," he said, almost shy. "Mason, you did not have to do that. I know, but I wanted to." He handed her the package. "It is not much, but I saw it in town and thought of you." Helena unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal and a set of pencils. She looked up at him, confused. "You are always telling stories when we talk," he explained. "About your mother, about Chicago, about the things you have seen. I thought maybe you would want to write them down. Keep them safe." She felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different tears. Happy tears. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Really, really." She set the journal down carefully and stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you." But Mason turned his head at the last second, and her kiss landed on the corner of his mouth. They froze, barely breathing, and then Mason cupped the back of her head and kissed her properly. It was nothing like the kisses she had experienced before. There was no demand in it, no possession. Just warmth and tenderness and a question that he let her answer. Helena melted into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady under her palm. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for months." "Me too," she admitted. "I meant what I said before. We take this at your pace. I will wait as long as you need." "I know. And that is why I am ready to stop waiting." His smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face, and he kissed her again and again until they were both grinning like fools and misses. Thompson called from the parlor asking if someone was going to bring out the pie. They sprang apart, laughing, and Helena felt something she had never expected to feel again. Safe, cherished, loved. The winter months passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Mason and Helena were careful to be discreet around the ranch, not wanting to cause gossip or make the other hands uncomfortable. But in the early mornings, when it was just the two of them in the kitchen, or the late evenings when everyone else had gone to bed, they were learning each other in all the ways that mattered. Helena told him more about Richard, about the slow erosion of her sense of self, about the fear that had become her constant companion. Mason listened without judgment, his jaw tight with anger at the man who had hurt her, but his touch always gentle. He told her about his own scars, about the ranch foreman in Texas who had beaten him for being too slow, about the years of hardship that had taught him to trust no one. "We are quite a pair," Helena said one night as they sat together on the porch despite the cold, watching stars wheel overhead in the clear black sky. "Maybe that is what makes us perfect for each other," Mason replied. "We both know what it is like to be broken. We both know the work it takes to heal." "Do you think we can?" Helena asked. "Really heal, I mean, or do we just carry our damage forever?" Mason was quiet for a long moment. "I think the scars stay, but I think they hurt less when you have someone who understands. Someone who does not expect you to be perfect." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "You make me believe I can have a future that is different from my past." "You can. We both can." In February, a stranger rode into the ranch asking for work. He was a lean, hard-faced man with cold eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. Something about him made Helena's skin crawl, but Mrs. Thompson was short-handed after Charlie had left to care for his sick mother, so she hired him on a temporary basis. His name was Jake, and he watched Helena with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She tried to tell herself she was being paranoid, that not every stranger was a threat, but her instincts screamed danger. Mason noticed her unease. "You want me to send him packing?" "You cannot fire someone just because I get a bad feeling." "I can if he makes you uncomfortable." "Mrs. Thompson needs the help. I will manage." But managing became harder when Jake started finding excuses to come to the kitchen outside of mealtimes. He would lean against the door frame, watching her work, making comments that were just the wrong side of appropriate. Helena kept a knife close when she cooked and made sure she was never alone in the house with him. One afternoon, Mason came in to find Jake standing too close to Helena, backing her against the counter. The foreman had Jake by the collar and out the door before the man could even sputter a protest. "You are done here," Mason said, his voice cold and hard. "Collect your pay from Mrs. Thompson and get off this ranch. You cannot fire me for talking to the cook. I can fire you for making her uncomfortable, for not respecting boundaries, for being the kind of man who thinks a woman owes him attention. Now get out before I make you leave." Jake must have seen something in Mason's face because he backed down, muttering curses but going. Helena stood in the kitchen with her heart pounding, and when Mason came back in, she threw her arms around him. "Thank you. Always," he said into her hair. "I will always protect you, Helena." Always. That night, Mason asked her to marry him. They were in the kitchen again because that was their place, where everything important seemed to happen. Helena was making bread and Mason was supposedly reviewing supply lists, but mostly he was just watching her work. Suddenly he stood, came around the table and took her floury hands in his. "Marry me," he said. Helena froze. "What? Marry me, Helena? I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I do not care about convention. I care about you. I love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worthy of love, that you are enough, that you are everything." "Mason." Her voice cracked on his name. "If you are not ready, I will wait. If you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that I am serious about this. About us, about building a life together." Helena looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience and understanding. This man who had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. This man who made her believe in second chances. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy brought Mrs. Thompson and the hands running from all corners of the ranch. When they found Mason swinging Helena around the kitchen, both of them laughing, the older woman just shook her head with a smile. "About time," Mrs. Thompson said. "I was wondering when you two were going to stop dancing around each other." They were married in early April as the snow melted and the first green shoots pushed through the muddy earth. The ceremony was held in the Bozeman church, small and simple, with Mrs. Thompson and the ranch hands as witnesses. Helena wore a dress Mrs. Thompson had helped her make, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Mason wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his expression awed as Helena walked down the short aisle toward him. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment and partnership, but Helena barely heard the words. She was too busy looking at Mason, at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had given her back herself. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed her with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. They walked out of the church into the spring sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Travis, and Helena felt like she had finally come home. Mrs. Thompson gave them the weekend in town as a wedding gift, paying for a room at the hotel. It was the first time Helena had stayed anywhere nice since leaving Chicago, and the first time she had shared a bed with a man since fleeing Richard's house. She was nervous, her old fears surfacing, but Mason was patient and gentle and everything she needed him to be. "We do not have to do anything," he said as they stood in the hotel room, the door closed behind them, the reality of their marriage suddenly very present. "I want to," Helena said. "I am just scared. He made me feel like this was something to endure, something he was entitled to. I do not know how to make it different." Mason took her hands, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. We make it different by making it about us, about what we both want. If something feels wrong or uncomfortable, you tell me and we stop. Your body is yours, Helena. I am honored that you want to share it with me, but it is yours. She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love and trust into it. And when they came together in the big hotel bed, it was revelation. There was no pain, no fear, no sense of obligation. Just pleasure and connection and a joy so profound it brought tears to both their eyes. Afterwards, lying tangled in the sheets with Mason's arm around her, Helena felt something inside her finally click into place. She was whole, she was healed, she was home. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Mason replied. "More than I ever hoped to love anyone. You are my miracle, Helena Travis." They returned to the ranch on Monday morning to find that spring had arrived in full force. The world was green and new, and Helena felt like she was seeing it all for the first time. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, cooking for the hands, planting a kitchen garden, helping Mrs. Thompson with the accounts. Mason was busy with the spring cattle work, riding out before dawn and coming home after dark. But he always made time for Helena, stealing kisses in the pantry, holding her close at night, making her laugh with stories about the day's mishaps. In May, Helena realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. When she was certain, she told Mason one morning in the kitchen, "I am going to have a baby." He stared at her, the coffee pot frozen halfway to his cup. "You are certain?" "Yes." The coffee pot hit the table and then Helena was in his arms, Mason spinning her around and laughing. "We are going to have a baby. Helena, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed." He set her down carefully, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "How are you feeling? Are you sick? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" "Mason, I am fine. Women have babies all the time." "But you are my wife having my baby, which makes it completely different and much more important." She laughed at his fierce protectiveness and kissed him. "I love you. I love you too, both of you." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Helena found herself exhausted in a way she had never experienced. Mrs. Thompson, who had no children of her own, fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest more and work less. Mason was even worse, trying to wrap Helena in cotton wool and keep her from doing anything more strenuous than stirring a pot. Helena tolerated their concern because she knew it came from love, but she also made sure they understood she was not an invalid. She kept cooking, kept managing the house, kept living her life. The only concession she made was to let Mrs. Thompson hire a girl from town to help with the heavier work. Summer faded into autumn, and Helena's belly swelled with their child. She felt the baby move for the first time in late August, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her cry with wonder. Mason spent hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling their child kick and turn, his face lit with awe. "I cannot believe we made this," he said one night as they lay in bed, his palm spread over her belly. "That there is a whole person in there that is half you and half me. I know. It is terrifying and amazing all at once. You are going to be a wonderful mother. I hope so. I am so afraid I will not know what to do, that I will make all the wrong choices. You will make some wrong choices, so will I, but we will make a lot more right ones and we will figure it out together. That is what matters." Helena laced her fingers through his. "Together. I like the sound of that." The baby came in early December during a howling snowstorm. Helena's labor started in the middle of the night, and by dawn the pains were coming hard and fast. The town doctor could not get through the snow, so Mrs. Thompson and Mason delivered the baby together, Helena gripping their hands and screaming her way through the worst pain she had ever experienced. When the baby finally came, tiny and red and squalling, Helena burst into tears. Mason cut the cord with shaking hands, and Mrs. Thompson cleaned the infant and wrapped it in soft blankets before placing it in Helena's arms. "A son," Mrs. Thompson said, smiling. "You have a son." Helena looked down at the tiny face, at the dark hair plastered to his head, at the blue eyes that were so like his father's. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one, we have been waiting for you." Mason knelt beside the bed, his arm around Helena, his finger touching their son's tiny fist. The baby gripped it instinctively, and Mason made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Mason said. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Matthew John Travis after Helena's father and Mason's father. Little Matthew was a good baby, crying only when he was hungry or wet, sleeping in long stretches that Mrs. Thompson declared miraculous. Helena recovered quickly from the birth, though she was grateful for the help Mrs. Thompson and the town girl provided. Mason was besotted with his son, spending every spare moment holding him, talking to him, showing him off to anyone who would look. The ranch hands took turns cooing over the baby, even the gruff old Roy who pretended he did not care, but always had a finger for Matthew to grip. Helena watched her husband become a father and felt her heart swell with a love so vast, it frightened her. This was what she had never thought she could have. This family, this home, this life. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, more than she had ever hoped for. Winter passed in a haze of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Helena was exhausted, but it was a sweet exhaustion, the kind that came from caring for someone she loved more than life itself. Mason helped whenever he could, walking the floor with a crying Matthew in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, giving Helena breaks when she needed them. Spring came again, and Matthew was 6 months old, a fat, happy baby who smiled at everyone and was just starting to sit up on his own. Helena had returned to cooking for the ranch, though now she did it with her son in a basket nearby, within sight and reach. One afternoon in late April, a stranger rode into the ranch. Helena was in the kitchen making bread when she heard the horse's hooves in the yard. Something made her look up, made her move to the window, made her heart start to pound. The man who dismounted was older than she remembered, thinner, his face marked by hard living. But she would have known him anywhere. Richard had found her. Helena's first instinct was to grab Matthew and run. But where would she go? How far could she get? And more importantly, she was done running. This was her home, her life, her family. She would not let him take it from her. She left Matthew sleeping in his basket and walked out onto the porch. Richard saw her and smiled, and it was the same smile he had used to court her, charming and cold in equal measure. "Helena, I have been looking for you for 2 years. You should not have bothered. You belong to me. You stole from me. I took what I needed to escape. Consider it payment for the hell you put me through." Richard's face darkened. "You are coming back with me, now." "No, I am not." He started toward her, and Helena saw the intent in his eyes, the violence she remembered too well. But before he could reach the porch steps, Mason appeared from the barn, moving to stand between them. "You need to leave," Mason said, his voice level but hard. "This does not concern you, Cowboy. That is my woman. That is my wife. And you are trespassing." Richard's eyes went to Helena's left hand, to the gold band there, and his face contorted with rage. "You married him. You are mine, Helena. Mine. I was never yours. You do not own people, Richard. You do not get to control them or hurt them or hunt them down when they have the courage to leave." "I will kill him," Richard snarled. "I will kill this cowboy and anyone else who tries to keep you from me." Mason did not move, did not flinch. "You can try. But I should warn you, there are 4 other men on this ranch who are very fond of my wife. And Mrs. Thompson, who owns this place, has a shotgun and knows how to use it. You are outnumbered and outmatched. Leave now while you still can." As if summoned by her name, Mrs. Thompson appeared on the porch with her shotgun cradled in her arms. The ranch hands were emerging from various buildings, all of them armed, all of them moving to create a loose circle around Richard. Richard looked around, his hand going to the gun at his hip. For a moment, Helena thought he would draw, thought there would be violence and blood. But even Richard was not stupid enough to think he could win against 6 armed people. "This is not over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Helena said, and her voice was stronger than she expected. "I am not the scared girl you abused in Chicago. I am not alone anymore. I have a husband who loves me, a family who protects me, and a life I have built with my own hands. You have no power over me. None. Now get off our land and do not ever come back." Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Helena stared back, refusing to look away, refusing to show fear. Finally, he turned and mounted his horse. "You will regret this," he said. "The only thing I regret is wasting 2 years of my life believing your lies. Goodbye, Richard." He rode away, and Helena stood on the porch watching until he was out of sight. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the steps, shaking. Mason was there in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "You were amazing," he said. "So brave. I was terrified. But you faced him anyway. That is what courage is." Mrs. Thompson patted Helena's shoulder. "He will not be back. Men like that are cowards at heart. He will find some other poor girl to terrorize." Helena hoped she was right, but she did not let her guard down for weeks. Every time a horse rode into the yard, she tensed. Every stranger made her heart race. But Richard did not return, and gradually, Helena allowed herself to believe she was truly free. Life on the ranch settled back into its rhythms. Matthew grew, learning to crawl and then to walk, his first word da-da, which made Mason insufferably proud. Helena had never seen her husband so happy as when he was playing with their son, making him giggle, teaching him about horses and cattle and the wide Montana sky. Mrs. Thompson announced her retirement in the spring of 1884, saying she was getting too old for ranch work and wanted to move to town where she could be near the church and her friends. She offered to sell the ranch to Mason for a price so reasonable it was practically a gift. "You have made this place what it is," she told him. "You and Helena both. It should be yours." So Mason Travis became a ranch owner, and Helena became a ranch owner's wife. They worked side by side to keep the Twisted Pine running, Mason managing the cattle and the land, Helena managing the house and the accounts. It was hard work, but it was their work, and that made all the difference. In 1885, Helena gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret after the flowers Helena loved and the woman who had given them their chance. Rose was colicky and difficult in a way Matthew had never been, but Helena loved her fierce little daughter with the same intensity she loved her sweet son. The years passed in a parade of seasons. They added to the herd, built a new barn, survived drought and blizzard and market crashes. There were hard times and good times, but through it all, Helena and Mason had each other. Matthew grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch and the cattle. Rose was wild and spirited, always climbing trees and catching frogs and demanding to know why she could not be a cowboy too. In 1888, they had a third child, another son they named James, who was quiet and thoughtful and preferred books to horses. Helena watched her children grow and marveled at how full her life had become. Some nights, lying in bed with Mason's arm around her, she thought about the scared, broken girl who had stepped off the train in Bozeman 6 years ago. She barely recognized that girl anymore. That girl had been certain she would never be enough, never be worthy of love, never be anything but damaged. But Mason had shown her differently. Day by day, year by year, he had loved her with a steadiness that had rebuilt her from the inside out. He had never asked her to be anything but herself, had never demanded more than she could give, had never made her feel less than whole. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason took her up to the high pasture where they could see the ranch spread out below them, the mountains rising in the distance, the endless sky above. They sat in the grass with the horses grazing nearby, and Mason pulled her close. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" he asked. "In the kitchen, when I told you how I felt, I said I would never be enough. And I said you were more than I ever hoped for." He turned her to face him, his blue eyes serious. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. You are the mother of my children and the beating heart of this ranch. You are everything, Helena, everything." She kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. "You saved me. No, you saved yourself. You had the courage to leave, to start over, to trust again. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed someone to believe in you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I know. I feel the same way." They sat together watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together, and Helena felt a peace she had never known before. She had been so certain she was broken beyond repair, that the scars Richard left would define her forever. But Mason had shown her that scars were just proof you had survived, that you were stronger than whatever tried to break you. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just needed someone to see it until she could see it herself. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Matthew took over more of the daily operations as he got older, showing the same steady leadership his father possessed. Rose shocked everyone by becoming a talented horse trainer, gentling the wildest mustangs with patience and intuition. James went east to college but came back with a degree in veterinary medicine, setting up practice in Bozeman and caring for all the animals in the valley. Helena and Mason grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by decades of hard work. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the first passionate rush of new romance. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The twisted pine stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, each adding their own chapter to its story. On a warm summer evening in 1920, Helena sat on the porch of the ranch house with Mason beside her. They were both in their 70s now, moving slower but still sharp, still engaged with the ranch and the family that had grown up around them. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing across the open land. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked suddenly. "Marrying me, taking on all my baggage." Mason looked at her with the same love he had shown her for 36 years. "Not for a single second. You were never baggage, Helena. You were a gift, the best gift I ever received. I was so broken when we met. You were hurt. There is a difference. And look at you now. Look at what you built, what we built together. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, a ranch that is thriving, a life that matters." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I never thought I could have this. Any of this. I thought I would spend my whole life running, looking over my shoulder, never trusting anyone. But you took a chance. You let me in. You made it easy. You were patient and kind, and you never gave up on me. Because I saw who you really were from the beginning." strong and brave and capable of so much love. I just had to wait for you to see it too." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the same mountains that had watched over their love story from the very beginning. Helena thought about the girl she had been, standing in that saloon in Bozeman with a bullet hole in the window and nowhere to go. She thought about the moment Mason had offered her a chance, a job, a future. She thought about every moment between then and now, the hard times and the good times, the laughter and the tears, the ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for showing me that I was more than my past, more than my scars, more than my fear." Mason kissed the top of her head. "You never needed me to show you that. It was always there. I just held up the mirror until you could see it yourself." "Still." "Thank you. You are welcome, and thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to say yes, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and more happiness than I ever thought possible. You are more than I ever hoped for, Helena Travis. You always have been." She smiled, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude and joy. The scared girl who had thought she would never be enough had become a woman who knew her worth, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain, who had loved and been loved in return. It had not been an easy journey. There had been moments of doubt, nights of fear, days when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. But through it all, Mason had been there, steady and true, loving her with a constancy that had healed wounds she thought would never close. And she had been there for him too, supporting his dreams, raising his children, building his legacy. They had saved each other, in all the ways that mattered. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Helena looked up at the vast Montana sky and felt nothing but gratitude. She had found her home, her purpose, her people. She had found love that was patient and kind, love that never failed, love that endured all things. She had found everything she never knew she needed in a dusty frontier town, in a kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee, in the eyes of a cowboy who saw past her broken pieces to the woman she was becoming. And it had been more than enough. It had been everything. Years continued to pass, and eventually Helena and Mason passed on, dying within months of each other the way people who have been deeply in love for decades sometimes do. They were laid to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky that stretched forever, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had raised. The twisted pine continued on, generation after generation, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love that Helena and Mason had built. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still in love after all these years. It was just a story the family told, of course. A romantic notion, nothing more. But it was a good story, the kind that reminded people what really mattered in life. Love, family, home, second chances. The courage to believe you were enough, even when everything in your past told you otherwise. Helena's journal, the one Mason had given her that first Christmas, was preserved and passed down through the family. In it, she had written their story, every detail from that first day in the saloon to their golden years together. The last entry, written just days before she died, read simply, "I came to Montana believing I would never be enough for anyone, least of all myself, but Mason showed me that I was more than enough. I was exactly what he needed, and he was exactly what I needed. We built a beautiful life together from the broken pieces we each brought to the table. If you are reading this someday, know this: you are enough. Whatever you have survived, whatever scars you carry, whatever fears keep you up at night, you are enough. You deserve love. You deserve happiness. You deserve a second chance. Take it. Be brave. Let yourself be seen. The right person will look at your broken pieces and see something beautiful. I know, because that is what Mason did for me, and it changed everything. And so the story ended where it began, with a woman who thought she was not enough finding out she was everything, with a cowboy who saw past the surface to the heart beneath, with a love that transformed two damaged people into something whole and beautiful and true. The Twisted Pine Ranch stood for over 100 years, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, courage over despair, hope over resignation. And though the original house was eventually replaced, though the barn was rebuilt and the land subdivided among descendants, the story remained. It became the kind of story parents told their children, the kind grandparents whispered to grandchildren, the kind that reminded people that love could heal, that second chances were real, that being enough was not about perfection, but about being brave enough to be yourself and finding someone who loved you for it. Helena and Mason's great-great-grandchildren still ran cattle on part of the original ranch land, still told stories about the woman who fled Chicago with nothing and the foreman who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. They told about the confrontation with Richard, about the babies born during blizzards, about the hard years and the good years and the love that sustained them through it all. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings when the whole family gathered for reunions, someone would raise a glass and toast to Helena and Mason, to the courage it took to start over, to the love that made it all worthwhile. They would toast to being enough, to being seen, to being loved despite and because of all your broken pieces, because that was the real legacy they left behind. Not the ranch, not the cattle, not the land, though those things mattered. The real legacy was the lesson that you could survive the worst things life threw at you and still build something beautiful. That love was not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who saw you perfectly. That you were not defined by your past, but by how you chose to move forward from it. Helena had said, "I will never be enough." And she had meant it with every fiber of her being, believing she was too damaged, too broken, too scarred to be worthy of love. Mason had replied, "You are more than I ever hoped for." And he had spent the rest of his life proving it to her in 1,000 small ways and a few big ones. And in the end, that was the whole story. Two broken people finding each other in a dusty frontier town, choosing to build a life together despite their fears, creating something that lasted far beyond their own lives. It was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that proved love could conquer even the deepest wounds if you were brave enough to let it. The Twisted Pine Ranch still stood as a monument to their courage, their love, their unshakable belief that everyone deserved a second chance. And somewhere, in the whisper of wind through grass, in the lowing of cattle at sunset, in the laughter of children playing in the yard, Helena and Mason's love story continued, reminding everyone who heard it that being enough was not about being perfect. It was about being brave enough to try.